here's a little poem for Pentecost for you. It was, Seamus Heaney, the Irishman, wrote it, and he dedicated it to his mother, who is the central character in the two brief little stories that the poem tells. Two stories of two rituals, sacred rituals, two stories bound together by memory. So Heaney is an Irishman. He knows a lot about memory. He also knows a lot about potatoes. And I gotta believe the man wrestled with his Catholic faith throughout his life. But I would submit to you that he knew about the Holy Spirit. So the poem goes like this. When all the others were away at Mass, I was all hers as we peeled potatoes. They broke the silence, let fall one by one, like solder weeping from the soldering iron. Cold comforts set between us, things to share, gleaming in a bucket of clean water. And again, let fall. Little pleasant splashes from each other's work would bring us to our senses. So when the parish priest at her bedside went hammer and tongs at the prayers for the dying, and some were responding and some crying, I remembered her head bent toward my head, her breath in mine, our fluent dipping knives, never closer the whole rest of our lives. To be present to one another, to be bonded by that presence. Brothers and sisters, that's the work of the Holy Spirit. To allow us to be present to one another. And in that presence to be bonded. As I hear the poem, it was allowed to happen in Seamus Heaney because he was a little child, standing next to his mother in their home when he had her all to himself. And maybe the Holy Spirit takes hold of children in a especially powerful way. And maybe the Holy Spirit takes hold of us when we become like little children. Presence and bonding, the work of the Holy Spirit. The scripture scholars tell us that the writer of the Gospel of John, as he got into those final verses, when Jesus was preparing his disciples for his departure, the scholars tell us that the author of the Gospel calibrated the words of Jesus to express over and over again in different ways, for the sake of his disciples, his nearness to them, his presence to them, which would never be broken. I will not leave you orphans. On that day you will realize that I am in my Father, and you are in me, and I in you. I am the vine, you are the branches. So I hear this gospel tonight, this post-resurrection account of Jesus, as almost a climax to those assurances, a dramatization of Christ as close to his followers as breath, as intimate as that communication. As intimate as that vehicle of presence, breath. I don't know if you caught that one line in the poem, but something about the potatoes falling from the knives into this bucket, like solder from a soldering iron. Now I feel I've peeled a few potatoes in my life, but I've only ever watched a welder working with solder. However, I did have a friend growing up who had a kit that he was given for Christmas. Something to do with electronics and a circuit. I did watch him one time with a wire and some solder, and nobody got hurt. But I look up at these little tongues of fire here in this chapel. And in light of Heaney's poem, I wonder whether these tongues could be seen as drips of solder. Flame that bonds us, brothers and sisters. That material that fuses joints which have become weak, or connections that have never been made. Maybe that's what the power of the Spirit is about, if we look at it as this material which is all about structural reinforcement, structural integrity, brought about by the power of presence, brought about by the power, as the root of the word solder really is, to make solid. When we are solidly there for each other, the Spirit is at work. When we are present to each other, Jesus Christ is there. Well, even more than that, our real presence to each other is the presence of Christ through the Holy Spirit. I guess there's one thing above all that I love about the Catholic faith. And it's that we take the real presence seriously. Real presence. Actual presence. Transformative presence. Not only here, although certainly here at this table that we'll all gather around, but kind of like Heaney's time with his mother. It was time away from the ritual. All the others were away at Mass. And there was real presence. He couldn't really follow the prayers of the priest who was going hammer and tongs at the prayers, but there was real presence at his mother's bedside, presumably on her deathbed. That's a treasure of our faith, and it's one that we celebrate on this Feast of Pentecost. Now, I want to tell you, Heaney died last year. And at the time that he wrote this poem, I would guess 25, 30 years ago, he was living in a country that was fractured. Ireland, the Troubles, the violence and the division in that nation was at times horrifying. And it was brutal. And it was relentless. Very recently, I saw a photograph online of the Queen of England shaking hands with a former lieutenant of the IRA. Did anybody else see that? It happened. Now there's reconciliation happening in Ireland, but you know as well as I do that in probably every country that was named when Lynn proclaimed that first reading, in every place that was depicted there in its present day, violence is at work. Division is at work. Factions are tearing nations and ethnic groups and families apart. We have a role to play as disciples of Jesus Christ. We have a role to play today in which we not only celebrate the Holy Spirit, but are challenged by the Holy Spirit to embrace again the integrity of our lives, the integrity of our communities, to become a soldering sign to this world as followers of Jesus Christ, that presence, real presence, is possible and can transform even knives into tools of reconciliation. It's a great feast. It's when we start over again. It's when we check our structural integrity for signs of weakness and begin again. Happy Pentecost, brothers and sisters. Let's let the Spirit rain down upon us.